Bilingual Development for Children Ages 3 to 5, presented by Katie McGough, Kathy Reynolds, and Grayson Willson. 4 common myths often associated with bilingual children. 1. Growing up with more than one language confuses children. 2. Raising a child to be bilingual leads to speech delays. 3. Children are like sponges and they'll become bilingual without effort and in no time. 4. If your child has a developmental disorder or learning disability, then learning a second language will make everything even harder for them. 17.8% of the American population is Hispanic or Latino. This is the largest minority in the country. Languages can either be learned simultaneously or sequentially, and we refer to these people as English language learners. Most children learning a second language will experience a silent period in which they are observing but often very quiet. These children are still learning. Comprehension of the language will precede production of the language, and this is a normal occurring process.
Acquisition of words in a bilingual child will actually be rather similar to a way that a monolingual child develops with their vocabulary. No matter what a language or how many languages a child is learning, what matters most and what will predict their abilities most is the language exposure at home. That is even greater predictor than socioeconomic status, which was previously believed to be a predictor of language. In regards to pragmatics, a young English language learner will benefit from greater attention to communication with increased eye contact and proper pitch and prosody from the speaker. Often in bilingual children, we will see some code switching from their first language. This is where words or aspects from the first language will carry over into the second. This can affect word choice, morphology, or the structure of their speech. For example, a child whose first language is Spanish may tell you, "I have 5 years," because in Spanish the proper response to "How old are you?" is "Tengo 5 años." Because of this, we need to consider the rules of the child's language and subsequent dialect. Knowing these rules will help distinguish between a language disorder and a language difference. In regards to phonology, also consider the first language of the child. This may affect sounds that the child will either add or omit from their language. For example, Spanish only has nearly half of the sounds that we have in English, so it may take a child a little longer to acquire these sounds than their peers. Some things to consider when working with an English language learner is the perspective of the child. ASHA suggests that the ideal situation for an English language learner in a classroom is instruction with 90% first language and 10% English for kindergarten and first grade, as to not overwhelm the child with an obscene amount of English, and to also provide instruction that they will actually comprehend in a language that they already know. Ideally, over time, this would fade into 50% first language and 50% English by grade 6. But ASHA does understand that this is a lot to ask, and this might not happen for every situation, but they would advise instruction in the first language if at all possible. Some other accommodations that you can make for an English language learner in your classroom would be to provide additional instruction for tasks or provide additional cues, also allowing extra time for responses and for them to comprehend the question before they respond to you. Also, always keep in mind their culture and their dialect, and if a task, activity, or question might conflict with those or their answers, just keep in mind the rules of their dialect.
This is a great resource from the Ohio Department of Education to look even deeper into English language learners. We have put together a short test with true and false answers to recap on a few of the topics we covered today. Feel free to go over and try to answer to the best of your abilities. Here are the correct answers to the questions. Number 1 is false because it is typical for a bilingual child to experience a silence period. Number 2 is also false. These children continue to need guidance with the language they are acquiring and will need accommodations while working through this process. Number 3 is true. The child's culture should always be taken into consideration as each culture and dialect have their own rules they follow. They may not have the background knowledge to answer a question correct or to understand a concept that is given to them. Number 4 is false. Bilingual children will most likely always need accommodations until they have the ability to separate each language. And finally, number 5 is true. The English language has almost twice as many sounds compared to that of Spanish. Thank you for watching our video and having interest in helping these bilingual children succeed. Here are the sources we use to compile this information.